4 weeks ago, we jumped in to a series that we're going to finish up today called Stuck UnStuck. And really at the beginning of the series, I just said to you, hey, I don't think I've ever wanted anything more for us, for you, that I want this. And that is for us to be people who live fully unstuck, fully free, wide open, the soul lives. And yet, for many of us, for too many of us, there's been too long that we've lived kind of in a condition of stuckness or a season or a place of stuckness. And we said it happens to us, and a lot of times we're not even sure how we get there, but we kind of find ourselves in this seat, and somehow a seatbelt gets fastened and latched around us, and no matter what we do, no matter how many self-help methods we try, no matter how hard we try and muscle our way out, we can't seem to get unstuck. We can't get unstuck from the addictive pattern that we don't really want, and we're not even fully sure why or how we picked it up in the first place, or we can't fully get free of this discouragement. I mean, we understand grief, and we even know why we grieve and what caused us to grieve initially, but now we can't quite seem to get all the way healed up and whole and to get unstuck, and we feel like life's passing us by a little bit, and our relationship with God is somehow stalled, and it's less than we feel like is promised to us. For some of us, it's just being stuck in condemnation and guilt and shame, and I'm pretty sure we're forgiven, but to somehow live fully forgiven and free of the condemnation that goes with it, like, oh, but my past is this, my past is that, and somehow that past just anchored us into the seat, and we keep trying to get out, and we can't. For some of us, we've just been stuck in our own fears. We want to make courageous, empowered decisions, and yet the unfortunate reality is we look around like, oh, every decision I make is somehow laced with fear. Everything I decide through a lens of trepidation or fear or worry or anxiety. And I don't want to live that way. I somehow want to get unstuck, and I want to get free of that. And we said when we started the series, if we were really honest, we would all say that, hey, unstuck is our deepest desire. We don't like living stuck lives. We long to be unstuck. We long to be free. We long to have souls that live and move in the wide open of life. And the good news is that we uncovered pretty quickly was just this reality that Jesus said, hey, you know what? Look, I actually came to get you unstuck. I actually came to set you free of the thing that has you stuck. Jesus, reading about himself in the book of Luke, he said, hey, I've come to actually set the oppressed people free. I've actually come to shatter the thing that holds you. I've actually come to unlatch the seatbelt for you that you cannot unlatch on your own. I've actually come to do that for you. He said, hey, that's great. How do we move into that? And in week 2, we just said, hey, the one common ingredient of every stuckness condition, you being stuck, me being stuck, whoever being stuck, that stuckness is always anchored by a lie. And there are millions of different lies. But the fact is that a lie always is what holds us stuck. That's why Jesus said, hey, I did come to get you free. I did come to get you unstuck. And it's actually the truth that's going to do that for you. It's the truth that will get you unstuck. We get caught in lies like, oh, I could never be free. Jesus says, no, actually, you can. It's the very reason I came was so that you could be. And we need that truth to replace the lie. The lie that kind of holds us is the truth that shatters that which holds us. And last week, we got a little more specific, and we just said, hey, that's great, but what's one of the most common, how do we narrow the focus here a little bit? And we talked about one of the most common things that keeps so many of us stuck. In fact, I'd venture to say that at some point in time, it gets all of us stuck. We've all been hurt, we've all been dinged, we've all been wounded somehow. And all of us somewhere along the way find ourselves in the spot where we're wrestling through, you know what? I got to be a forgiver. Because the bitterness, the unforgiveness is actually what begins to hold me down. It's actually what begins to make me stuck. And we talked about in the scriptures, God pointing out the plan that Satan, our enemy, says, hey, it's through your bitterness that I actually want to outwit you. The scheme of the enemy is to outwit us through just leaving us with this wound and no ability to forgive and no real awareness that we need to forgive to fully move on. And last week, tons of you just at the end of our gatherings just walked through steps of forgiveness, and an incredibly, incredibly powerful experience. And we've said, hey, we've got to be aggressive in this. And a lot of you have begun to pursue some very Christ-centered counseling, and more of you have pursued freedom appointments, and you continue to do that. And don't let up on that. I mean, it's more than a 4-week series saying it's kind of positioning our lives in a place where we can live unstuck. We can live fully free. And this week, just to kind of bring a close to this deal, we're going to talk about one more very specific thing that a lot of us get stuck in. And I just want to tell you, like on the front side, it's kind of an awkward topic. There's just a layer of awkwardness that goes with this. And we all have awkward topics in our life, right? I mean, that you bump into those on occasion. I mean, it's a lot of times awkward to talk about your in-laws, right? And anybody spend in-law time this weekend? Holidays, you spend in-law time? Yeah. Any of you, your in-laws are in the room and you're getting nervous by, yeah, right there. Yeah, okay, yeah, there it is. Yep, with you all the way. And what's funny is that the in-law conversation can be awkward, right? And I have relatively good in-laws. Like, I married into this pretty good family. I have a good father-in-law, I have a good mother-in-law. And I said that first hour, and they weren't even in the room. And I said, they are in the room second hour. But I said that first hour, they weren't even here, right? I'm pretty fortunate. But you know, like, you marry somebody, you kind of marry this family, and things can get weird sometimes, right? I mean, you get one extreme of the in-laws who kind of want to subtly control your life. They want to influence every single decision. Then you get the other extreme, though, the in-law who won't weigh in on anything. The things you wish they'd weigh in on, no, they're just completely absent on that. You get the in-laws who just stay too long, like you live out of town or whatever else, and they come and they just think they can move in for eternity, right? Like, hello, there's a limit to this, right? I love you. At the end of 3 days, I'm not sure anymore. I mean, right, there's this window, but this is awkward. There's the other extreme where it's like they won't come. They won't ever show up. They show up without calling. They don't ever show up. They show up and they stay forever. They don't ever. I mean, there's these extremes, right? And the weird thing is, it's an awkward enough conversation that most of us don't ever really have the full conversation. Instead of having the full conversation, we end up arguing with our spouse or having these tense moments or throwing in these little jabs, these little comments, we're kind of tearing the in-laws down. And we would never really have the conversation with our in-laws about what could or should be, right? We might have that with our own parents, but our in-laws, it's just awkward. It's just weird, right? Well, in this whole deal of figuring out, like, listen, how do we really live a life of following God? I mean, how does that really play out? How do we really go from stuck to unstuck? How do we really find the freedom that Jesus seems to promise us? We bump into some awkward topics. We bump into some topics that they change the emotion and the feeling in the room with just the mere mention of it. And we're actually going to go down one of those roads today. We're going to talk about a topic that just can feel awkward to lots of us. We're going to talk about kind of the awkward in-law conversation in the church setting of sin. We're going to talk about sin. And for some of you, it just got weird. Now, some of you exhaled. You're like, oh, I thought it was money. Right? No, we'll do that some other time, right? But it's just, we even mentioned sin, and for some of us, it's like, oh, here it goes. Like, now I'm going to hear about it. I'm going to get beat over the head. I'm going to get belittled. I'm going to feel like I got to do more. I'm going to feel like I can't do that, right? And for me, there's this risk of as soon as we put it on the table, we're like, oh, yeah, this is the week everybody leaves mad. They just mark it down. Here it is, right? We just mentioned the time. It's just like the pulse in the room changes somehow. But what if? What if we could talk about sin? Our rebellion against God, us choosing our way above God's, us thinking our standard or our thinking is somehow better than God's standard or thinking. What if we could talk about that in a way that was actually incredibly life-giving and hope-filled and encouraging and inspiring and motivating? What if we could talk about it in a way that just breathed life into our souls and actually helped us believe that we could go from stuck to unstuck? The Bible actually talks about sin like that. In fact, if you've got a Bible, I want to invite you to open it to the book of Romans. Romans chapter 6. Romans is in the New Testament of the Bible, so if you're new to finding things in the Bible, whatever, that's great. Just begin in the table of contents, and there's two big headings, Old Testament, New Testament. Look under the New Testament section, you'll find Romans. When you get to Romans, the big numbers are the chapters, and we're going to start in Romans chapter 6. And while you're turning, here's just a little bit of context to what's happening in Romans. There's this guy, Paul, who wrote a lot of what we have as the New Testament of the Bible. He was at one point a persecutor, really a killer of Christ followers. And he has this dramatic, life-altering encounter with God, and he himself becomes a Christ follower, and he goes around starting churches all over the map. I mean, he gets anywhere he can get, starting churches, and then he writes letters to those churches. He writes letters to people he hopes to get to one day, but at the end doesn't actually get to. He's incredibly influential and used by God in the first century to just shape who Christ followers would become. And in this letter that we have today called Romans, he starts out by saying, hey, you know, at the end of the day, I just want you to rest assured, everybody's going to have a chance to enter a relationship with God. Regardless of where they are and how removed they are, they're going to have a chance. Nobody's going to be without a chance. God, in some way, shape, or form, will reveal himself to every single person. And then he begins to talk about how that relationship works itself out. And he talks about something that we kind of know as the law. And the law was developed in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's God saying to the people, hey, we have this relationship, but we got to figure out how to live in this relationship. So I'm going to give you this law, this set of commands. And really, they're to kind of be a framework for how to live in the relationship. But the challenge is the law itself, when the people heard it, what it really did is it pointed out their sin. It didn't actually empower them to be obedient. It didn't give them any real strength or any real ability to be fully obedient. In fact, it was so hard for them that what they actually started doing was they started adding their own laws. And they just kept on writing them. Like, hey, let's add 16 more. I mean, they just kept adding them. They would get more and more complex. And Jesus comes along and says, hey, there's a new way here. There's a new way. And Jesus comes, he says, hey, I'm going to offer you something better than that. That was the old way of relating to God. I'm going to give you a new way. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pay the price for your sin. I'm going to give up my life. I will be murdered to pay a price for everybody's sin. Death is the price for sin. It's the penalty. I'm going to pay that for everybody. And it's through that we get this opportunity at forgiveness. But Paul, unpacking this for the Romans, says, hey, it gets better than that. Actually, Jesus didn't just die to pay a price for sin. He actually came back from the dead. He actually fully beat sin and death. He actually conquered it. So you could actually be more than forgiven. Now there's more on the table. And he says, this new way, this is grace. You can't earn it. You don't have to memorize the code and try and figure this out. You can't earn your way into this. Jesus has done it for you. You accept it. It's a gift. It's grace. And in chapter 6, Paul starts to unpack that a little bit. Well, how do you live in that? I mean, how do we live this thing out? And here's what he says. Romans chapter 6, we're going to start just in verse 1. Paul says, what shall we say then? I mean, in light of this grace and this free gift that Jesus is bringing us, should we go on sinning so that grace could increase? Paul's talking to a bunch of people. They're like, hey, this is really good news. I really can go do whatever I want. Covered. We're good to go. Like, I can just sin at will. I can just be as rebellious as I want. It's all good. I was like, well, no, actually, that would be abusing grace. That would actually be abusing the gift that you've been given. That's not quite the right pathway. And I'd venture the guess that most of us in the room today, I mean, that's not really our aim. You didn't show up hoping to hear a message today like, man, we're going to go, and I hope that guy stands up there and talks to me about how I could sin better and more often, right? It's probably not. I mean, most of us, that wasn't why we showed up. But I think there are a lot of us who are trying to figure out how to sin less. And more than trying to figure out how to sin less, we're trying to figure out how to get unstuck from a sin. There's a sin that for a long time has just kept us stuck in the same seat. And we know that in some way, shape, or form, it's caused our relationship with God just to stall out. And we want it to be more, and we believe it could be more somehow, but we're stuck there. We're stuck somehow letting anger always get the best of us. We're stuck somehow lying, even when we don't really want to lie, and there's not a reason to lie. We find these lies coming out of our mouth. We're stuck looking at things we don't really want to be looking at, and yet we're addicted to this thing that we're looking at. We're stuck abusing the alcohol that we really want to be free of, and we're stuck saying the thing we don't want to say and reacting the way we don't want to react. It feels like, could I ever possibly be fully free of this negativity or this gossip or this slander or this greed or this selfishness? I'm stuck in it. And for some of you, everybody around you knows what you're stuck in. And for some, it's incredibly private, and it's the secret. It's the part of your life you're trying to hide, and you don't even want it to be part of your life. You don't want to keep on sinning. Like, no, I would actually like to get out of the chair. I would actually like to be fully unstuck. And Paul begins to paint this picture of just how possible that really is. Look at verse 2. He says, by no means, let's not just keep on sinning. We are those who have died to sin, so how can we live in it any longer? When we come to this place where we realize that just like everybody else that's ever walked the earth, we've sinned, we've rebelled against God, and we need a Savior, and we need a new leader of our life, and it's Jesus. When we, in that moment, give Him our lives and let Him become the leader of our lives, we actually die to ourselves. We're surrendering our own life in order to receive His life. Paul says that when you did that, he's writing to a bunch of people that did that. He said, when you did that, the game changed. The game changed. You died to that sin. It wasn't the leader anymore. Verse 3 says, or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into His death? He's painting this picture of, hey, you're actually being fully united with who Jesus was. Baptism was this powerful symbol. And in the first century, when people accepted Christ, they would have been baptized that day. They didn't sit around and talk about it, debate it, wonder about it, try and sort it out. They just knew that, wait, this is my mark. This is how I now identify myself with Jesus Christ and all of His other followers. And they just did it on the spot. So Paul's got this picture. He said, hey, you went into the water. You were buried with Him and raised with Him. There's something new. There's something changing in that. Verse 4 says, we were therefore buried with Him through baptism into death in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, catch the last 6 or 7 words of this. We too may live a new life. So, hey, look. When you give your life to Jesus Christ, yes, you are forgiven, but you are also unstuck from the grip and the mastery and the power and the dictation of sin. You're actually unstuck from that. That's not your boss anymore. That's not what holds the power. You actually get to get up, get unstuck, and actually live a new life. The same glory that raised Jesus Christ from the dead lives in you. We sang about it. Some of you even got excited about it. Right? Get to live this brand new life. Paul's saying, hey, wait, look. You are more than forgiven. You are forgiven, and that's great. But you're more than forgiven. You're actually free. You don't have to live there. And yet the lie that so many of us believe, look, the lie that keeps us stuck on this one is, I can't help it. I can't get free. I can't stop. I can't change it. I can't be different. I can't. Paul says, no, wait. The same glory that raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. When you give your life to Jesus Christ, that same glory lives in you, and you can be free. I was like, hey, let's look at how it happens. He even plays it out a little bit more just to keep driving it home because it's something really hard for us to grasp. It was something really hard for them to grab a hold of. In verse 5, he says, if we've been united with Him, again, if we've been joined with Him in a death like His, we'll certainly also be united with Him in a resurrection. We'll certainly also live a new life with Him. For we know that our old self, this self that was dictated to by sin, this self that was mastered by sin, this self that never seemed to actually have any power to say no and to get out of a sin cycle, that same old self was crucified with Him so that that body might be done away with. So that part of our lives might be done away with. There might become this separation. That we should no longer be slaves to sin, so that we're no longer pulled around by it and pushed around by it. We're no longer led by sin. Verse 7, he says, I love this, says, because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. Anyone who has died, fully surrendered their life to Jesus Christ, they're free. You know what the really good news is? Dead people are free people. It's true. Dead people are free people. When we give our lives to Jesus Christ, and if you wonder what the core of the gospel is, this is a great day for you to be here because the good news really is. The core of the message of Jesus really is, hey, I can forgive you. I have forgiveness to bring to your life. Just let me have your life. Let me live life for you. Let me become your life. And in that moment, I will absolutely forgive you. And in the same moment, I will also free you. You die. You surrender your life to me. And you're among the dead. And the dead are the most free. dead people are free people. What he's really saying is, hey, we can get beyond this cycle of sin, confess, sin, confess, sin, confess, sin, confess. It's the same sin all the time, and we don't want it. We want to be done with it. We want to be free of it, but we never seem to be able to get out, so we just sin, confess, sin, confess, sin, confess. Say what we don't want to say, confess. Look at what we don't want to look at, confess. Abuse what we don't want to abuse, confess. Over and over and over again. It's like, hey, maybe that could change. Last winter, I went up north to this cabin that somebody just let me use for a couple days. It was just on a study break. It was about 2.5 days that I was there. And on my last night there was this kind of mini snowstorm that went through. And I don't like winter at all. Like, I've been really open about that. So why I went north in the middle of winter is beyond me. But I did. And the snowstorm comes in on my last night there. And I'm like, ugh, are you serious? I get up in the morning, I look out, and it's just this even blanket of snow everywhere I can see. I mean, it's like, oh, like, my van's in this driveway, and like, hey, what am I going to do with this thing? The driveway is relatively steep, and it's got this relatively significant bend in it, and the driveway empties out onto a major state highway. Like, where's a good cul-de-sac when you need one, right? I mean, I could figure it out, right? So I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm like, wait. They told me they actually have a guy that comes and plows them out all the time because they're not there real often, and these people that own this place, and so they don't want to come and have 18 feet of snow. So I'll just wait out the plow. I can do that, right? A couple hours go by, a few hours go by. I'm like, maybe this isn't going to work. Like, I've got to get on the road. I had to be home for something that evening. Like, I've got to get on the road. I got to go. I'm like, all right, that's it. Just man up. Here I go. I'm going out. We're going to do this thing. I load up the van. I lock this cabin. I get in the van. I'm like, okay, goal number one. Do not become that guy that gets stuck in somebody else's driveway with nobody else around in a place that you do not know where you are, okay? That was objective number one, right? Like, okay, we'll just ease this thing down, right? I mean, I think I can kind of remember where the turn was a little bit in the driveway. I think, if I get to the bottom, I can kind of ease out and see the road. We'll just ease this thing down. So I get it going. I put the van in reverse, and I just start to ease it down. I'm moving. I'm just barely moving down. I'm like, this is working. This is going to happen. I glance out to the side, and I kind of check. I'm like, hey, I think I'm actually still on what probably is a driveway. I'm in the orbit somewhere, right? I look back out the window again. I'm like, actually, that was the same tree I looked at about 35 seconds ago. Maybe I'm not moving. And I kind of looked down and checked. I was moving so slow while I was moving that I didn't even realize I'd actually gotten stuck and I wasn't moving anymore. The speed had changed that much, right? I'm like, oh, are you serious? I get out, and I go out and I look, and I'm kind of behind the van, and I realize that, like, I can't see much, but I'm pretty sure that I have gone off the side of the driveway. I'm sure the right side of the driveway is not what I'm on anymore. And I don't know, they probably had a yard under there, but it's so far down, I don't have any idea, right? Like, what in the world am I going to do? I'm like, hey, I still have the key to this cabin. I run up and I get into the garage and I get out a shovel and I just start shoveling. I start digging underneath the van and I start shoveling out around the tires and everything else. I'm like, I can do this thing, right? So I shovel it out. I get back in the van and I do what everybody does that's really smart like me when you're stuck, right? When you're stuck in that environment, right? I close the door after shoveling out and I floor it. Just boom, pedal down all the way, right? Nothing. I get out and look around again. I'm like, I'm pretty much in the same spot. So let's shovel some more. And I just got into this shovel, get back in the van, floor it, nothing, shovel, floor it, shovel, floor it, shovel, floor it, over and over and over and over and over again. Nothing. I didn't move that thing an inch, right? Except down from the ground I was losing from flooring it all the time, right? Nothing. I'm like, all right, I'm officially that guy. I'm that guy. I get out my phone and I search for a local tow truck place and call the guy, and 30 minutes later or so, he's there, and he pulls up, like the good rocket scientist he was. He says, you really got that thing stuck in there, don't you? Thanks. Yep. Yeah, I didn't know that, right? I wanted to say something just incredibly sarcastic, but I still needed to get out and get home. So I said, yeah. I said, I am. Can you get me out? Like, it's pretty in there. Can you actually get me out? And he goes on to tell me all these stories of all these people he's pulled out from all these precarious situations. He even goes on to tell me that last summer he had pulled an outhouse out of somebody's backyard for them. I just need out of the snow. I don't need an outhouse story, right? Come on, right? So he kind of goes about his thing, and he shovels and picks around a little bit. He actually hooks something on the back of our van. He actually picks the back of the van up and moves it over and drops it. I'm like, yeah, I probably wasn't going to be able to pull that off. That was not going to happen. Right? He gets me on it. I could have lived forever. I could have shoveled until summer and not gotten out of that shovel floor it, shovel floor it, shovel floor it, shovel floor it. What I really needed at the moment is I needed a rescuer. I needed somebody to pick me up and move me out and put me someplace different. And the same is true when we get caught. Look, when we get caught in this cycle of sin, and the sin confess, sin confess, sin confess, sin confess, sin confess, and it never changes, and we're stuck in the same spot, what we really need is we kind of need a spiritual tow truck. We need a rescuer. We need somebody to pick us up and put us someplace different. We need somebody to pull us out and put us in to a different kingdom, to give us a different leader, a different master, and Jesus has actually done that. Jesus has actually showed up on the scene where we've been sin confess, shovel floor, and said, hey, wait. I'll do more than forgive you. I've actually come so that I could pull you up out of that and set you someplace different. I can get you unstuck and set you into the place of being unstuck, completely free of soul. I'll do more than just forgive you. Forgiveness is great news, some of the best news imaginable. But it's only part of the news. Jesus says, I far more than that. But how do we really live in that? I mean, that seems like good news. And Paul, he's taken multiple paragraphs to convince these people of it. I mean, it's tough to fully embrace. How do we get there? Look at verse 11. Just you might have to jump down a couple of spots or turn a page. But look at what he says in verse 11. He says in the same way, why don't you be people who count yourselves or consider yourselves? Why don't you be people who look in the mirror and look at yourselves as people who are dead to sin, not a slave to it anymore, but actually alive to God in Christ Jesus? Why don't you just fully embrace the fact, please fully embrace the fact that sin doesn't have to be the master anymore. Sin does not have to be the seatbelt that keeps us stuck anymore. Paul's saying Jesus did more than that. When you gave your life to him, you became forgiven and free. Forgiven and free. Let's be honest. Just be really honest, right? Especially for those of us who've done church a long time in a very church community. That's a little tough to fully get, isn't it? That's a little tough to fully embrace. We're really, really good. We're good at, I'm forgiven, and man, I need to be forgiven, so I'm forgiven. Man, that's half of the greatest story ever. The other half is you're not just forgiven, you're fully free. I wonder what it would be like if we just became people who got up and we looked in the mirror in the morning and said, I am free. I am free. I'm dead, so I'm free. Sin is not my master. Sin is not my leader. Sin is not who dictates my life. Sin doesn't lead me around anymore. I'm actually free. I'm actually alive to God in Christ Jesus. I'm actually alive to the things of God in my life. I'm unstuck. I'm not caught in a seat of sin anymore that I don't want to be in the first place. Jesus already did the unsticking. You don't have to try any harder to be unstuck. The thing we've got to do is let our minds be renewed to the truth that's already there. I love the fact that Jesus gave us some reminders along the way just to help us sometimes fully figure out how do we embrace this thing that we actually are unstuck. And he left us this model of communion, this experience we get to participate in. And he leaves us this bread that represents his body and this juice that represents his blood that's poured and spilled out for us. In part because it fully represents our forgiveness. It fully represents the price he went to forgive us. But I think he left it too because it's so dramatic. It's so drastic. It's an image of something that actually at one time is both brutal and beautiful. Because he went further than just forgiving. He went to the point of freeing. And this morning, we're going to take some time and we're just going to share in communion together. And I wonder if we could do this. You know, we'll take the bread together and be reminded of how just broken and mutilated his body really was for our sake and out of obedience to his Father. And we'll take the juice. It's this reminder of his blood that's shed for us pays the price because death is the penalty of sin. But when you're done with communion, I want to invite you to just keep and take with you this little cheap plastic cup that you drink the juice from. And I wonder if it could just be this constant reminder to us. When sin comes screaming, when sin tries to say again, no, I am your master, I am your leader, I wonder if this simple cup could just be the reminder of, oh, you know what? You know what? Jesus more than gave me forgiveness for you. Jesus actually empowered me to live free from you. Jesus actually unstuck me from your seat. Jesus actually already unbuckled the seatbelt that you've used to hold me for way too long. And what if it could just be this constant reminder and this constant renewal of our mind that enabled us day after day after day after day to be people who just said, no, 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 I am free. Dead people are free people. And I am free. I am unstuck. Will we still sin on occasion? Yes. But do we have to live as a slave to the same besetting sin in the same cycle of sin, confess, sin, confess, sin, confess? Nope. God, through Paul, says you could live a new life. And I invite you to just take the cup and let it be that reminder to you for however long it needs to be, a week, a year, 10 years, until the mind is fully renewed and the heart fully can embrace. I'm more than forgiven. I'm free.